I was sitting in that cheap office chair they never replaced, the one with the weird stain I had stared at for 8 years when Oliver Kent slid the folder across his desk. He had that same practiced expression, a mixture of a grimace and a smile. I knew what was inside before opening it. Rejection number 15. 15 times I had been passed over for senior consultant. I already knew who got it instead of me, Clara Stone. 12 months at the company. 1 year of tenure compared to my 8 years of sacrifice. Oliver leaned forward like we were co-conspirators instead of whatever we actually were. He said the fourth quarter was not our strongest period for leadership transitions, but he had already placed my name at the top of the list for spring promotions. I nodded like I believed him, like I had not heard almost those exact words 14 times before, like I had not trained every person who had been promoted above me. Then I did something that surprised both of us. I started laughing. It was not a polite giggle, but the loud, deep kind of laugh that makes people in adjacent offices uncomfortable, the kind that says you have finally snapped. Oliver's customer service smile glitched. He asked if there was something funny. I looked him in the eye and told him that the joke was me for believing him 15 times. That was the moment I decided to burn it all down. Let me introduce myself. I am Jason Vance. I was 35 when this happened, working as a consultant at a boutique firm called Summit Advisory Partners. We did business transformation consulting for healthcare companies. For 8 years, I had been the person they called at 11 o'clock at night when everything was falling apart. 8 years of being told I was invaluable, but apparently not enough to promote. Summit Advisory Partners was founded by 3 guys who fled a major consulting firm. They had this whole family routine they used to justify 70-hour work weeks. Oliver was employee number 8. I was employee number 30, hired when they were still trying to prove themselves. I automated their reporting systems and saved their biggest account, Apex Healthcare System, when our project manager quit mid-implementation. I delivered every single time, but they did not promote me. They would tell me I needed client-facing experience, so I would get it. Then they would say I needed to lead a team, so I would lead one. They kept moving the goalposts. Meanwhile, they promoted people around me. Justin Drake, who missed deadlines constantly but played golf with Oliver. Sarah Finch, who could not build a basic reporting dashboard without my help, but was best friends with our director. And now Clara Stone, whose main qualification was going to the same business school as our chief executive officer, Howard Briggs. I used to wonder what was wrong with me. Was I not charming enough? Not political enough? I spent so much time trying to crack the code. But watching Clara parade around the office with her new senior consultant business cards, something clicked. There was no code. The system was rigged against anyone who actually believed merit mattered. That night, I went home and sat on my bathroom floor, wondering how I became this person. I called my sister, Megan Vance, and she listened to me rant for an hour. Megan is an economist, so she always diagnoses my life problems with economic theories. She told me to quit. I argued that I could not just quit after investing 8 years. She told me that was just the sunk cost fallacy talking. She explained that those years were gone, and staying would not bring them back. I told her the job market was tight and I needed the income. Megan interrupted and clarified that she did not say find another job. She said quit as in stop giving them my best, stop caring, and stop trying to earn the approval of people who had no intention of giving it to me. I sat with that for a minute. I told her that was not who I was. She replied that maybe it was who I needed to become. I could not sleep that night. I kept thinking about how I had spent 8 years trying to prove myself to people who had decided not to see me. Something hardened inside me, and a plan started forming. I knew how everything at Summit actually worked. I knew which clients were on the edge of leaving, which projects were behind schedule, and where the critical dependencies were. Most importantly, I knew that despite being denied a promotion 15 times, I was the glue holding their major client relationships together. The next morning, I went to work like normal. I smiled at Oliver in the hallway. I congratulated Clara. I answered frantic emails from project teams. But something had changed. For the first time in 8 years, I was not trying to impress anyone. Instead, I started documenting everything. I organized every process I had created and every workaround I had invented into a private digital notebook. That was my property, not company property. Then I created what I called my indispensability map, a detailed analysis of exactly how much the company depended on me, and which clients had relationships with me specifically rather than with Summit as a whole. I gave myself 8 months to execute my quiet exit. I was not going to do the bare minimum. I was going to work hard, but my goal had changed. I was working for myself. The first phase of my plan was making myself even more indispensable. It sounded counterintuitive to work harder for a company that had repeatedly rejected me, but it was a necessary step. I volunteered for the most complex client problems and became the sole go-to person for critical troubleshooting. When Apex Healthcare System, our largest client, experienced a system error, they did not call the Summit support line. They called me directly on my personal phone because they knew I would resolve the issue within minutes. I was careful not to sabotage anything or create artificial dependencies. I simply positioned myself as the only effective solution to problems that already existed, and I documented every single resolution in my private digital journal. The second phase was building my escape hatch. I started having casual coffee meetings with former colleagues who had left Summit for other consulting firms. I wanted to understand the market and hear about their experiences. I also updated my portfolio, not my resume, because I was not looking to join another traditional firm. I was laying the foundation for something much larger. I spent my evenings organizing my project case studies, outlining the methodology I had developed, and proving the financial impact of my work. Phase 3 was the trickiest part of the entire process. I had to start detaching myself emotionally from the workplace while still appearing fully invested in my daily duties. I stopped taking it personally when Oliver would take credit for my ideas during client meetings. I stopped feeling hurt when I was excluded from leadership lunches or strategic planning sessions. I began to view Summit not as the company, to which I had dedicated 8 years of my life, but merely as a stepping stone and a source of funding for my future enterprise. Around month 5 of my plan, the partners announced another promotion. This was promotion number 16. Normally, seeing someone else get promoted would have devastated me. But this time I felt nothing but detachment. The promotion went to Brandon Cole, a colleague who had been at Summit for only 3 years. Brandon was aggressively mediocre, but he possessed an abundance of unearned confidence that seemed to dazzle the partners. When they announced his promotion, I walked over, shook his hand, and congratulated him with a genuine smile. Oliver looked incredibly confused by my reaction. He had expected me to look defeated, or at least to request a meeting in his office to ask what skills I needed to improve. But I did not. I simply returned to my desk and continued working on my transition documentation. His customer service smile completely slipped when he realized he could no longer manipulate my emotions with the carrot of a future promotion. By month 7, my financial preparation was complete. I had managed to save enough money to cover my personal living expenses for 8 months without any active income. I officially incorporated my own consulting business, Veritas Consulting Group, keeping it strictly on paper for the time being. I also secured a small business line of credit from a local bank to cover initial operating costs if needed. Most importantly, I started having very careful, private conversations with 2 of Summit's major clients, Apex Healthcare System and Century Health Group. I knew from my daily work that both organizations were deeply dissatisfied with the high rates and declining quality of service they were receiving from Summit. I did not actively poach them. I did not ask them to leave Summit or sign contracts with me. Instead, I simply acted as a helpful advisor. I answered their general questions, provided industry insights, and built strong personal relationships outside the corporate umbrella of Summit. I made sure they knew they could rely on my expertise, regardless of where I was employed. I had given myself exactly 8 months from that 15th rejection to execute my plan. As the final weeks approached, I felt a mixture of fear and excitement. I was preparing to walk away from the stability of a steady paycheck, but I also knew that I had built an ironclad foundation. Every process was documented, every client contact was organized, and my financial safety net was secure. I was no longer the desperate employee begging for crumbs of validation. I was a business owner in waiting, just biding my time. The weekend before my planned resignation, I met Megan for dinner. She looked at my detailed transition plan and the financial statements for my new business. For the first time in years, she did not diagnose my career with an economic warning. Instead, she smiled and told me that I had successfully managed my exit like a seasoned corporate strategist. She reminded me that the risk I was taking was calculated, and that calculating risk was the difference between a reckless gamble and a strategic move. Her support me to walk into the office on Monday morning. I spent Sunday evening reviewing my resignation letter one last time. I made sure it was professional, concise, and devoid of any emotional complaints. I did not want to give them any leverage or any reason to accuse me of being unprofessional. I was going to leave on my own terms, with my head held high. The countdown was over, and the execution phase was about to begin. On Monday morning, exactly 8 months to the day after my 15th promotion rejection, I walked into Oliver's office without scheduling an appointment. He was reviewing a spreadsheet and did not look up immediately. When he finally raised his head, I did not wait for him to speak. I placed my resignation letter flat on his desk and told him that I was quitting. His face went through a rapid succession of expressions, shifting from mild annoyance to complete disbelief, then to anger, and finally settling on a look of sheer panic. He told me that I could not quit. He argued that we were in the middle of the critical implementation phase for Apex healthcare system, and that I was currently leading the entire Century Health Group project. He insisted that the team needed my leadership. I kept my composure, smiled politely, and explained that I was giving my standard 2 weeks' notice, all of which was detailed in the letter. Oliver immediately tried to pivot, asking him if the decision was related to the recent promotion cycle. He claimed that the third quarter was approaching, and that he had been actively advocating for me behind closed doors. I cut him off mid-sentence. I told him that my resignation was not a negotiation, and that my decision to leave was final. The next 2 weeks after that conversation were absolute chaos. It was the most spectacular workplace collapse I had ever witnessed, and I had a front-row seat to the entire disaster. First, Oliver tried to convince the senior partners that my departure would have minimal impact. He called an emergency leadership meeting that afternoon, which I was not invited to attend. According to what I heard later, Oliver assured everyone that my contributions were valuable, but that the firm had strong systems in place to handle the transition. That was the moment they began to realize how wrong he was. Over my 8 years at Summit, I had quietly built and maintained the vast majority of the firm's operational infrastructure. I was the one who had spent countless late nights fixing system errors that no one else understood, and creating workarounds because the official software was outdated and inefficient. It was as if I had been holding the entire firm together with sheer willpower and technical duct tape. By day 3 of my notice period, the initial denial had vanished, replaced by pure panic. Oliver started scheduling daily knowledge transfer meetings, desperate to extract as much information from my head as possible. He even asked if I would write comprehensive training manuals and create video tutorials for my replacement, a person who did not even exist yet. I smiled and told him I would be happy to do so, but that my private consulting rate was $350 an hour. He sputtered in anger, pointing out that I was still an employee of the firm and was obligated to do the work. I corrected him gently, reminding him that I was an employee for only 11 more days and that my standard duties did not include authoring training curricula for roles that had not been filled. He threatened to complain to the senior partners, but they were already dealing with a much larger crisis. Beatrice Hall, the chief information officer of Apex Healthcare System, had discovered that I was leaving the firm. Apex was Summit's largest and most profitable account, representing a significant portion of their annual revenue. Beatrice had called our chief executive officer, Howard Briggs, directly on his private line. I only found this out because Howard's executive assistant, Chloe Miller, was a good friend of mine. Chloe and I went out for lunch at a diner down the street, and she was practically vibrating with excitement. Chloe told me that Beatrice had been incredibly blunt with Howard. She had warned him that if I was no longer managing their healthcare implementation, Apex would immediately invoke their review clause to terminate the contract. Chloe whispered that she had never seen Howard sweat so much in all her years of working for him. She said the entire executive suite was in complete disarray. By the end of my first notice week, the firm made its first official attempt to keep me. Oliver called me into his office, but this time Howard Briggs was sitting there with him. Howard looked tired, his usual corporate bravado replaced by an anxious frown. He told me they had been discussing my immense value to the organization, speaking as if my contributions were a brand new discovery rather than something I had been proving for 8 years. Howard offered to promote me to senior consultant. Immediately, accompanied by a 20% raise, I had to suppress a laugh. The exact promotion I had earned and begged for over a course of 15 rejection cycles was suddenly available the moment I walked out the door. I looked at both of them and told them that I appreciated the offer, but I had already made other arrangements. Howard looked shocked, as if the concept of an employee having viable options outside his firm was entirely alien to him. He asked what it would take to make me stay. He suggested they could increase the raise to 25%. I looked at the desk, then back at Howard, and told him that the issue was not about the money. It was the truth, yet it was also a lie. The money mattered, of course, because they had underpaid me for nearly a decade while reaping the benefits of my labor. But more than that, it was about basic professional respect. It was about refusing to spend another day in an environment that had shown me 15 separate times that I was only valuable when I threatened to leave. I stood up, thanked them for their time, and walked back to my desk to continue organizing my personal files. By the beginning of my second notice week, the desperation at Summit Advisory Partners reached an all-time high. Multiple systems began to experience critical errors that only I knew how to resolve. Clients were calling the office daily, bypassing their assigned project managers and demanding to speak with me directly. The Century Health Group implementation was falling significantly behind schedule because none of their analysts could figure out the custom reporting dashboard I had developed from scratch. The atmosphere in the office was thick with tension, and the managers looked increasingly exhausted. That was the moment they made their next offer. Oliver called me back into his office. Though his previous customer service smile was entirely gone, replaced by a look of sheer frustration, he was authorized to offer me a promotion to senior manager, skipping the senior consultant level entirely. This offer came with a 40% salary increase and a permanent seat on the leadership team. He told me that I was being completely unreasonable and that the firm was doing everything in its power to make things right. I looked at him feeling a calm sense of closure and told him that they had 8 years to make it right. On day 10 of my notice period, Howard Briggs himself walked down to my cubicle. The chief executive officer looked as though he had not slept in several days. His tie was slightly loosened, and the confident stride he usually displayed was entirely gone. He stood next to my desk, looked around to ensure no one else was listening, and told me to name my price. He said they would give me whatever I wanted. He offered me a director-level position, the freedom to choose my own consulting projects, and the option to work from home full-time. He begged me to just stay. For a split second, I actually wavered. The director title was something I had only dreamed of achieving at Summit, and the corresponding salary would have been completely life-changing for me. The ability to select my own projects and manage my own schedule was incredibly tempting. But then, the memories of the 15 rejections washed over me. I remembered the 15 times I had sat in Oliver's office, being told that I was not quite ready, that I needed more experience, or that the timing was not right. I remembered watching less qualified colleagues, who had done a fraction of the work, walk away with the titles I had earned. I looked at Howard, shook my head, and told him that my mind was completely made up. On my final day at the firm, I made a conscious decision to remain entirely professional. I did not want to leave behind any negative impressions or give them any reason to question my integrity. I handed over every piece of documentation I had prepared, including the contact details for all active projects and detailed status reports for every ongoing implementation. I did not sabotage a single file, nor did I delete any of the workarounds I had built. I wanted to leave with my reputation fully intact. As I was walking through the lobby toward the exit, carrying a small cardboard box containing my desk plants and my favorite coffee mugs, Oliver stepped out of his office to block my path. He looked at me with a mixture of anger and contempt, telling me that I was making the biggest mistake of my career. He claimed that the independent consulting market was brutal, and that I would not last 6 months on my own. I did not argue with him. I simply smiled, told him to watch me, and walked out the glass doors into the afternoon sun. Here is where the direction of my journey shifted. My revenge was not the dramatic resignation, nor was it the panic I had caused within the firm, though both were undeniably satisfying. The true impact of my departure began to unfold in the weeks that followed. The day after I officially left Summit, I scheduled formal meetings with the representatives from Apex Healthcare System and Century Health Group. I met with them not as a representative of Summit, but as the founder and chief executive officer of Veritas Consulting Group. Within 1 week, Apex Healthcare System officially canceled their multi-million-dollar contract with Summit. They signed an agreement with Veritas to handle their entire healthcare implementation, transferring their whole project portfolio to my new firm. The financial blow to Summit was catastrophic, as Apex had been their primary source of steady revenue. Shortly after, Century Health Group followed suit. Their chief operating officer, Paul Higgins, told me that when they called Summit to cancel their contract, Howard Briggs had desperately offered to slash their consulting rates by 40% in a last-ditch effort to keep them. Paul had declined, telling Howard that they were paying for expertise and execution, not just a discount on mediocre service. I was suddenly running a viable business with 2 major clients, and the transition had occurred completely within the boundaries of the law. I had spent 8 years building the trust of these clients, and when they realized the firm did not value the person doing the actual work, they chose to follow the talent rather than the corporate brand. I was no longer an invisible employee. I was a business owner, and the industry was beginning to take notice of my new firm. A few weeks after Apex and Century transitioned their business to Veritas Consulting Group, my phone rang. It was Howard Briggs, and he was absolutely apoplectic. He was screaming so loudly that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. He accused me of stealing company assets and threatened to sue me for breach of my non-compete agreement. I waited patiently for him to finish his rant. Once he stopped to catch his breath, I spoke in a calm, measured voice. I told him that his threats were empty. First, I pointed out that I had never signed a non-compete agreement during my 8 years at Summit, which was a major administrative oversight on their part. Second, I explained that even if such an agreement existed in my file, Summit was based in California. Under California Business and Professions Code Section 16600, non-compete clauses in employment contracts are void as a matter of law and public policy. Furthermore, under the Defend Trade Secrets Act, I had not taken a single line of proprietary code, client database, or confidential material. The clients had simply chosen to follow the independent relationships they had established with me over the years, which was entirely protected by law. Howard went completely silent. He was a chief executive officer, but he was also smart enough to realize when he had been legally defeated. He hung up the phone without another word, and I never heard from their legal department again. Over the next 3 years, Veritas Consulting Group grew rapidly. We expanded our team to 24 employees, and we were generating triple the revenue I had ever made during my peak years at Summit. One of my first hires was Laura Jenkins, a brilliant analyst who had been routinely overlooked at her previous employer. I established clear boundaries from the beginning. I no longer worked 70-hour weeks, and I made sure my employees did not either. We charged what we were worth, built systems that functioned properly from the start, and treated everyone with respect. 5 months into my new venture, Clara Stone, the colleague who had received promotion number 15, reached out to me on LinkedIn. She asked if we could meet for a quick cup of coffee. When we met, she looked incredibly nervous, constantly stirring her drink. She confessed that she was absolutely miserable at Summit. She said the company was falling apart, the projects were in complete disarray, and Oliver Kent was blaming everyone else for his own management failures. Clara told me that the partners talked about me as if I were some kind of corporate bogeyman. Howard had officially banned anyone from speaking my name in meetings, yet they could not stop talking about how smoothly the operations ran when I was managing them. She looked at me with exhaustion in her eyes and asked if she could come work for Veritas. I was shocked. I studied her face, looking for any signs of corporate espionage or deceit. But all I saw was a talented professional who was desperately drowning in a toxic corporate environment. I told her to send me her resume, and we would discuss the opportunities. Today, Clara is my director of client services, and she is absolutely brilliant when freed from the toxicity of Summit. Laura Jenkins runs our analytics division, and we even hired Chloe Miller, Howard's former assistant, as our director of operations. Exactly 6 months after I left, Howard Briggs called me from an unrecognized number. His voice was strained, and the usual arrogance was entirely absent. He admitted that Summit was struggling. Their quarterly numbers were the worst they had seen in 7 years, and they had lost 10 more major clients since my departure. He told me that they wanted me back. He offered to match whatever revenue I was generating at Veritas, or even double it. He promised me a director-level role, a significant equity stake in Summit, and the authority to run projects my own way. I sat at my desk, looking out the window, and closed my eyes to take in the moment. For years, my ultimate fantasy had been for Summit to beg for my return so I could triumphantly walk back in and claim the leadership seat on my own terms. But as I listened to Howard plead, I realized that I no longer wanted to go back. I did not want their titles, their money, or their corporate validation. I had built something far better, something that belonged entirely to me. I told Howard that I appreciated the call, but I was simply not interested. He pleaded with me to just name my terms, but I politely declined, wished him the best, and hung up. Today, Summit Advisory Partners is still in business, but they have downsized dramatically, occupying only a fraction of their original office space. Oliver Kent was let go by the partners last year after losing yet another major account. Howard reached out to me again 6 months ago, proposing a merger between our two firms, which I politely declined. Looking back, the true victory was not in watching them struggle or proving them wrong. The real victory was realizing that I never needed their permission or their titles to succeed. The 15 rejections I endured were actually 15 directions guiding me toward the independence I was meant to find. If you are currently sitting in a cheap office chair, feeling invisible and undervalued by managers who refuse to see your worth, please remember my story. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep an unappreciative company warm. You do not have to keep auditioning for people who have already decided they will never cast you. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do for your career and your sanity is to pack your things, walk out the door, and choose freedom.